I've always believed that fear lives in the shadows, but lately, it's more than a belief. It's an oppressive weight that strangles me tighter with every breath. I live alone in a small apartment, a stark, echoing space that now feels foreign, hostile. I wake up to the same stifling darkness. My body feels heavier than it should, as if the sheets are laced with lead, pinning me down. My pulse thrums in my throat, and for a moment, I can't remember why my heart is pounding so violently. Then it hits me. A dream. Was it a dream? I sit up, the air in the room thick, suffocating, almost alive, as though it was watching, breathing. I told myself I was just tired, but the shadows began flickering at the edges of my vision. At first, brief, then bolder, they stretched and twisted, nearly human. I could feel eyes on me. Always watching, always there. My head is spinning and everything feels off, as if the shadows themselves are watching, waiting. The silence presses against my eardrums, too complete, too absolute. I reach for my phone, desperate for an anchor in this void of fear. The screen lights up. 1:03 a.m. I force a breath, wiping the cold sweat from my brow. It was just a nightmare. Only a nightmare. I repeat it like a mantra, trying to believe it, but a nagging feeling clings to my mind. Something isn't right. I lay there for a few moments, listening to the stillness. That's when I hear it, a faint tapping. It's almost indistinguishable at first, like the sound of fingers brushing against a window pane. My heart skips a beat. I glance toward the window, barely visible in the pitch black. The blinds sway slightly, even though there's no breeze. And then I hear it again, closer this time. But it's not just tapping. There's something beneath it, low and garbled. Whispers. The dread creeps back. The minutes are slipping faster now. I can hear something moving in the closet. Soft, scraping noises against the floor. Things are moving throughout the room. I don't want to know what they are. I freeze as I feel the mattress dip beside me, as though someone has climbed in, inching closer. My breath catches, heart nearly stopping. I can feel it, the weight of something crawling toward me beneath the blankets. I felt something cold brush against my arm. Too real, my skin prickles. I throw off the blankets and sat up, attempting to see as much of the darkness as possible. The sound seems to snake its way around the room, creeping into my ears. I strain to hear, but the words refuse to form. They twist and coil, becoming something indecipherable, something wrong. My blood turns to ice as they burrow deeper into my mind, taking root in places I didn't know fear could reach. I look at my phone again, irrationally hoping the time will calm me. 1:27 a.m. How did I lose track of time so fast? The knock comes again, but this time it's from the closet. I stare at the door, my mind racing, trying to piece together if this is a dream or if I've lost myself in the night. And then it opens, slowly. I can't see inside, but the air grows colder and I can hear breathing. Heavy, wet breaths, as though something is hiding just beyond the door. I close my eyes again, tears streaming down my face. I can't face it, but it doesn't matter. Suddenly, I feel it, a presence. In the mirror across the room, something flickers just on the edge of my vision. My pulse quickens as I slowly turn my head, eyes locking onto the reflective surface. My breath catches in my throat. The reflection isn't right. I'm not alone. There, standing just behind me in the mirror, is a shape. At first, it's only a blur in the periphery, but as I stare, its form becomes clearer. A figure, tall and lanky, its limbs distorted as if broken and twisted into unnatural angles. It's motionless, but its eyes, two pits of pure black, darker than the void around it, bore into me. They stand out against the dark, voids of nothingness, in a room already drowning in shadow. I swallow hard, but my throat is dry, and every muscle in my body screams at me to run. Yet I can't move. And then, in the reflection, it moves. Slowly, its head tilts toward me, a grotesque motion that sends a shiver down my spine. My own reflection remains frozen, wide-eyed, as if I've been cut out of reality, locked in this surreal nightmare. I blink, and it's gone. The room is empty again, the mirror showing only me, drenched in sweat, trembling. I lurch out of bed, my legs weak and unsteady. My footsteps echo unnaturally, like I'm being followed by a second set. And then, footsteps that aren't mine, soft, small, right behind me. I whip around, heart pounding in my throat, but there's nothing. I hear it again, a sound like creeping footsteps, barely audible but unmistakable. My heart skips. It's nothing, I tell myself. It has to be. But the sound comes again, closer this time. I tell myself it's just another nightmare, a cruel, vivid trick of my tired mind. But the whispers, they don't stop. They slither through the darkness, circling closer, becoming louder. I stumble toward the light switch, desperate for the comfort of illumination. It doesn't work. The room stays submerged in its unnatural darkness, oppressive and unyielding. I stared into the mirror again, searching for, something. Myself, maybe. But the reflection stared back, empty. A child's face crept into the edges behind mine. I blinked, and it was gone. Or maybe it was still there, hiding in the corners where I couldn't see. I felt his grin on my neck. I raised my phone to my face, fingers shaking as I checked the time. 2:23 a.m. What? No, it can't be. I checked it again, but the numbers don't change. The dread coils tighter around my chest, suffocating me. I hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, approaching from behind. My skin crawls with the sensation of being watched. No, hunted. The shadows surged forward, surrounding me, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. They wouldn't let me. I clawed at the air at my chest, trying to scream, but my voice had been swallowed by the dark. I feel them. I feel them inside me. I stumbled away from the mirror. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't just me anymore. Behind me, the child grinned, my grin, stretching wide, tearing at the corners of its mouth. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop the laugh bubbling up my throat, choking me. I whip around, but nothing is there. Just the same impenetrable darkness. My heart thunders in my chest, and I catch sight of the mirror again. Something is wrong. I can't bring myself to look directly at it, but I see it shifting, warping. The whispers grow louder, more frantic, like a chorus of voices, yet I still can't understand them. They claw at my mind, pulling me deeper into confusion. I turn away from the mirror, my hands shaking uncontrollably. No escape. Who am I? The shadows there. It's 3:07. I'm not alone. Still, always. Time never moves here. Not in the dark. The shadow shifts closer. I glance toward the corner of the room. There's something there. A figure, crouching, watching. Time doesn't exist anymore. Who's laughing? Is that me? The child. It's in my head. Stop. Stop the clock. Stop. 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 I see it. It sees me. We are one. We are everywhere. You reading, you see it too. Don't look at the clock. 3:07. Are you sure you're alone? The reflection, it's smiling. I stumble toward the window, desperate for some sign of the outside world, but as I pull back the blinds, there's nothing. The glass reflects only blackness. No streetlights, no stars, just an endless, suffocating void. The world outside is gone, swallowed by the same emptiness that's creeping into my room. And then, from behind me, a sound. A crackling, wet noise, like something tearing through flesh. I freeze, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. Slowly, I turn back toward the mirror. My reflection has changed. It's me, but it's not. My eyes are hollow, my skin pale, and there's blood dripping from my mouth, from my hands. But worse than that, standing behind my reflection is the figure, the same twisted, shadowed form, with its pitch-black eyes fixated on me. This time, its mouth opens wide, an inhuman grin stretching far too long, revealing rows of jagged, decayed teeth. It raises a hand, a long, gnarled hand that looks more like a claw, and places it on my reflection's shoulder. I can feel it, cold and wet, pressing into my real skin. I scream, stumbling back, but no sound escapes. My voice is gone, trapped in my throat. The thing in the mirror grins wider, its black eyes consuming everything. I blink hard, my mind reeling, hoping, praying for this to end. When I open my eyes again, I'm back in bed. 1:03 a.m. My breath catches. No. The tapping begins once more. The same soft, rhythmic knock, knock, knock against the window. My heart hammers in my chest, my stomach turning with dread. I've been here before. I've done this before. The closet door slams shut. The whole room feels like it's vibrating, the air thick with the presence of something I can't see, but can feel everywhere. And then, I hear it. Whispers. But this time, they're not just from the walls or the shadows. They're inside my head, telling me things, whispering secrets I don't want to hear. This isn't a dream. My throat tightens, panic rising. I can feel it now. Whatever's in the room with me, it's close. The whispers become louder, more aggressive, clawing at my mind with indecipherable urgency. My head pounds and I clutch it, gasping for air. I try to push the voices away, but they burrow deeper. My vision blurs, the room spinning as reality itself seems to warp around me. Suddenly, there's a sharp pain in my chest, as if invisible hands are reaching inside, tearing me apart from the inside out. I gasp, clutching my shirt, but there's no wound, just the overwhelming agony and a sickening sense of something twisting my soul. I can't breathe. My thoughts blur. The whispers, they're inside me now. I force myself to check the time. 3:07 a.m. Still always. Time never moves here. I scramble to my feet, staggering toward the mirror again. It's the only thing that remains clear in the spinning darkness. My reflection looks back at me, eyes wide with terror, but something's changed. Behind me, the figure looms again, but this time, it's not alone. There are others, dozens of them. Figures draped in shadow, their black eyes watching me, waiting. Their whispers grow louder, more frenzied, but still, I can't understand them. I can only feel their intent, malice, hunger, hatred. My reflection grins again, blood dripping from its mouth. The figures move closer, closing in on me from all sides. 3:07 a.m. No. I know I've checked the clock. I know time should move, but it's stuck. I'm stuck. The whispers are louder now. They're telling me about you. You're not safe either. The world cracks. I feel myself shatter as the whispers consume me, their meaning clear now. I can hear you reading. You know what happens next. You're already trapped, just like me, just like them. Don't look away from the screen. Don't check the time. If you do, we'll see you. You feel it, don't you? The darkness around you, the eyes that aren't your own watching from the corners. You thought you were alone, but you're not. You're never alone. Welcome to your new reality. My parents got married while still in high school. I wouldn't recommend this. The 12th grade to be exact. They were legal adults. I came just a year later, when my mom was 19 and my dad was 20. We lived in a one-bedroom upstairs apartment in a crappy complex. I slept in my crib until I started climbing out of it and finding my way into my parents' bed or into trouble. When I was 4, my parents decided I needed my own room, so they upgraded to a 2-bedroom downstairs apartment in the same complex. They fought horribly all the time, but outside of that, everything was pretty normal. I made a few friends with other children around the complex, and a cousin and her 3 kids also lived into the complex. Everything was fine until a new neighbor moved in next door when I was 6. Immediately, this lady didn't like me and she didn't hide it. I was at school when she moved in, but on the weekends when I went out to ride my big wheel bike and play, she stood in her door and glared at me with the most hateful look a person could give a child. To be honest, I didn't like her either. Something about her bothered my spirit greatly. Though at the time I didn't understand why. It's like she could sense my presence outside and would literally spawn outdoors just to glare daggers at me and mutter things under her breath. I felt an evil presence on her and started making a cross with my fingers whenever I saw her. This enraged her, and she lied and told my mom that I threw her a middle finger. My mom believed me instead. Strange things started happening in my room at night. I had a rocking horse. It was beautiful, and I enjoyed playing on it. However, it started rocking on its own whenever I tried to sleep. I heard this as the springs made a distinctive noise. I had one of those dolls that eyes open and close depending on if it's lying down or sitting up. The doll's eyes would sometimes remain open while lying down, or it would blink, scaring the crap out of me. There would be strange knocking noises in my wall. My parents heard this as well, and they permitted me to sleep with them in bed. One day, my mom and I got locked out of our apartment. This was before everyone had cell phones, 90 SS, and our cousin wasn't home. My mom, against my pleas, knocked on the neighbor's door to use her phone. She let us in, glaring at me the entire time. I never let go of Mom's hand or came from behind her leg. In her house, on her wall were multiple upside-down crosses, strange-looking masks, some with horns. There were candles everywhere and small, colorful bottles with powder in them. My mom looked around like WTF, but kept her composure. She held my hand tighter, made the phone call to my dad at his job to hurry back now, and we quickly exited the apartment after thanking the woman. She watched me as we left. My mom told my dad everything, and he told his father, my grandfather, who was a pastor. He immediately brought us a bottle of prayed over olive oil, holy oil, to anoint our house. My mom also told her side of the family, who were very strict Christians, and they were, for a lack of a better word, flabbergasted, and started a prayer meeting. A few days later, we noticed at our back door a white powder substance across the threshold. My mom poured some of the oil on it, and it absorbed it and disappeared. The woman later tried to offer me some candy, which I declined, though I loved sweets. My nickname was Sugar Ant because I loved junk so much. I had made friends with a little girl in the complex that lived on the other side. One day she had some soft shoes and offered me one. Like an idiot, I accepted and ate it. It didn't take long before I fell violently ill. Fever, sweating, skin darkened, dark circles around the eyes. Nothing given to me at the doctors helped. I couldn't keep anything down. On intuition, my mom asked, did I accept and eat anything from anyone? And I confessed to accepting candy from a friend. She asked around and found out the girl was the granddaughter of our next door neighbor. My dad called over my grandfather and my mom her family. They anointed me with holy oil and made a prayer circle around me and started speaking in tongues. I was in and out of consciousness. My grandfather lifted me up and made me drink some of the oil. I remember it burning my throat. Suddenly I had to throw up. I leaped from the couch where I was laying and sprinted to the bathroom, where I started throwing up a thick, black sludge. A lot came out. My mom was shaking and on the verge of tears. Everyone continued praying in tongues. I threw up for a while until it was all out. I suddenly felt a lot better. I was fussed at for accepting food from strangers, even friends. The adults talked while I rested. After a few days, the woman saw that I was fine. This time, I glared at her back as I was angry. I was young, but I understood she had tried to poison me for no reason. I made the cross sign again with my fingers, and she went back in her house and slammed her door. She moved out sometime after that. Back in 2020, I got married to a girl who claimed her family had some spooky paranormal encounters once. While we were dating, we went to an overlook in our city where you could see the city lights below and the moonrise over the Rocky Mountains. It was a beautiful spot and a favorite for talking. One of those nights, we were in my car just listening to music when all of a sudden my girlfriend got really quiet and said, "Do you hear that?" I did, but I thought it was coming from her. It was a heavy breathing sound. What's even weirder is that it didn't go away when the music was turned up and became clearer when we turned it off. And it was clear enough and obvious enough that I figured it had to be coming from my car. I rolled down the windows, but it didn't increase the sound at all. Whatever it was coming from inside the car. I put my hand on the handle of the car, but my girlfriend screamed, "No, don't, please. Don't go out there." So I just froze, and she just started crying. We left, and I dropped her off at her parents' house. 15 minutes later, She texted me saying she heard it inside the house too. Later that week, she told me her family had heard this kind of stuff before once, and that it stopped when they asked the pastor to bless their house. Weird, and I didn't know what to think of it. But a year later, we got married. On our wedding night, she told me about a dream she had 2 years prior. She saw a large figure in her dream, who pointed to a man who she said looked like me from the back. She said in that dream there was a house, and she was climbing up the stairs when she saw me with my back turned. That was it. She woke up as I began to turn towards her. During our marriage, it was rough. It was as if anything and everything we planned just messed up. COVID took our jobs, depressive episodes, declining health, car accidents. Friends suddenly moved away. Things became issues that we had talked about before. It was all things I thought were fixable, but we eventually moved back to her hometown to be closer to family. During this time, I was diagnosed with a form of depression, and my wife was too. It made no sense. I was relatively happy with my life, and I loved my wife. Things were tough, but not in a depression-inducing sense. We got a dog, and that helped, but then my wife's anxiety and depression spiked. She became a shell of herself. She withdrew from me. I learned at this time that she had 2 schizophrenic family members, and her sister struggled with bipolar disorder. I was worried, but my wife promised to see a therapist. I didn't think of it, but my wife requested one that specializes in trauma and schizoid-type symptoms management. Then, one night, we are visiting my family across town. We are in my bedroom I grew up in our bed. We both were just talking when we heard the breathing again. This time, we both just froze. I had forgotten about it. She put her hand on mine, and that's when we hear, "Hey." A moderately deep, breathy voice coming from the ceiling. We both sat straight up, and both of us looked in the same direction. We saw nothing. We both heard it. We got out of bed and went to the living room where my mother was still watching TV. She saw something was wrong and asked us what happened. My wife looked at me, and I looked at her and just said, "Mom, we heard something. Somebody said, 'Hey.'" I tried mimicking the voice, and my mother's eyes widened. She looked at my wife, who nodded in agreement. My mom didn't have an answer either, suggesting it was probably the TV, but that's not possible. The TV was too low, and the sound was coming from the ceiling, not the door. The next day, we took family photos, and during the photo shoot, my wife started crying outside of one of the older historic houses. When I asked her what was going on, I pulled her close and told her everything was going to be fine. Sometimes, anxiety symptoms caused her to cry. That's when she told me she had a dream of this house, and that when she had that dream, she saw herself dying. This was the house she saw on our wedding night. We went back to her hometown, and our marriage rapidly spun out of control. My wife divorced me. Turns out she'd been cheating. It was a tough divorce, but once she left, so did my symptoms of depression and most of my anxiety. It was a hot summer day. I had gone for a hike and got seriously lost, which is another story. Suffice it to say that I had hiked through trackless wilderness for mile after mile, and even when I found a road, I was so far from a car, I didn't know which direction to go, dead tired, exhausted, and still several miles back to the car. Finally, I was on the way home late afternoon on a hot, sunny summer day, after many hours lost in mountains and woods. It was about 15 miles to home, and I live out in the country. As I started into the drive, I saw an overweight, out-of-shape fellow hitchhiking in the direction I was going. I saw that he had a long, hard walk in front of him, just like I had just completed only 20 minutes ago. Of course, I felt sorry for the fella having a similar ordeal as I just had, and so I stopped and motioned for him to get in. I did not realize my ordeals for the day were not yet over. As he opened the door, he gave me a look, and we exchanged a greeting as he squeezed into the front seat. He was going to a spot on the highway way to my house, and away we went, engaging in light conversation. I glanced down at his side, I noticed he had a prosthetic arm made of a hard, heavy ballistic plastic with a metal hook for grasping instead of a hand. From the conversation, he was an out-of-work construction heavy equipment operator whose house was undergoing a bank foreclosure. He was basically squatting illegally on his own property, probably hitching around during the day to avoid the sheriff, evicting him and coming back in the evening to let himself into his basement. So basically a homeless vagrant and a transient that still had a physical address. This didn't raise any red flags with me at the time, though maybe it should have. I have a repertoire of interesting stories I like tell. I dusted one off and told him a yarn or two to pass the miles and be friendly as it makes the ride easier. He listened politely, and I found he liked to talk a little bit himself. My tales must have encouraged him because he began to tell me a very strange tale of his own. He began to relate to me that years ago, during what he claimed was one of the worst blizzards of the century. In his words, a woman had a bad accident on the US route that went past his house. He said that she was badly injured from the accident and bleeding to death. His story continued, and he mentioned that the weather was so bad that the road was undrivable, but as a construction operator, he had a backhoe. He said that he loaded the injured woman into the bucket of the backhoe and drove her 30 miles through the freezing cold and blizzard to a major medical center and delivered her to the ER. That was a pretty odd tale, I thought. I am pretty street smart, having seen a lot of the world and some of the more dangerous places in it. I believe that he had changed up the story somewhat to protect the guilty. He wanted to share a story, but disguise his role, or what had really happened. In other words, his story contained a kernel of truth, but he had changed a few details. I am quick to spot inconsistencies and also can analyze just as quickly. It comes with the street smarts, another word for the survival instinct. What I think is true was that a woman who was fatally injured, perhaps someone who had come to his door for help. I think that she died, and I think he used the bucket loader to bury the body. The why and wherefore I could not guess at, but I had immediately gotten that impression. I did not have much time to think about it, as the drive was coming to an end. It may seem weird to you that I came to that conclusion, but perhaps what follows will convince you. As he ended his story, we had come to the turn for his house. As I turned into the long driveway, he had just ended his story and now began to make improper propositions to me as to what he would like to have happen, amorously. I was a bit taken aback, but just simply told him politely that that was not my thing and ended my conversation as we pulled up to his house, and he continued to insist. The problem was that he was not taking no as an answer. I realized things were rapidly getting out of hand, but I am a cool customer when dealing with actual stress and danger. I'm pretty hardcore, which discourages most potential malefactors, but not this guy, which shows just how dangerous he was. He wasn't getting out of the car now that we were stopped, and he had his hard plastic arm, solid and heavy as a log, raised halfway between us, looking me straight in the eye and not saying anything. Having studied self-defense, I knew the deal. If I looked away or blinked, he would knock me out with the arm. He was formidable as well. He may have been fat, but he was a construction worker with large arms and muscles from a life of heavy work. The weight was all to his advantage in any struggle. I knew the deal though, and I always had a plan in case a hitchhiker proved to be dangerous. I had my seatbelt on and he didn't. The plan was to floor the car into his house at about 60 and put him through the windshield. Even if I was injured or unconscious myself, hopefully he would be worse. The idea was that the noise of a high-speed crash would bring neighbors to find out what happened, and I would also blare the horn. But I could see that if he went through the trouble on knocking me out for the purpose of a rape, that likely I would never wake up again. Someone this dangerous was not going to leave a witness that could put him in jail for the rest of his life. Likely, he was a career criminal, and this was not his first rodeo. The other secret learned from martial arts is never look away and hold the gaze, read the intent, and spontaneously block or deflect the initial attack. This guy could see from my eyes that he would have a real fight on his hands and that I was fully ready for a life or death combat. The situation ended when he opened the door and anticlimactically got out. I quickly backed out of the dooryard and spun the car around, giving him a departing glance and headed out. Phew, I thought. That is the most dangerous motherfucker that I had ever encountered. I really should call the state police and tell them to keep an eye on that scary bitch, because it will only be a matter of time before he tries to kill somebody, and at least they will have a warning about him on their files. But, I thought, the police often don't seem to take me seriously, and he didn't do anything other than pose a threat. No actual assault. What can I do? The real reason was, now that the situation was over, I just wanted to forget about it. It has been a very long day, after all. A police report would take up another hour of my dinner time, and I would have to deal with possibly skeptical or unhelpful authorities. In 2020's retrospect, I see now that that was a mistake. About 10 years later, the property was the site of a very active crime scene. A woman from a nearby state had come to live at that house and had gone missing. I did not realize that his house was the site till I drove by one day and saw a state police crime scene bus, about 5 cruisers and a police helicopter, and everything marked off with crime scene tape. And then I thought, oh my, I really should have let someone know. It might have prevented this. And I was lazy and concerned more with myself that day. The girl's body was later found in a local pond in a freezer that had come from that house. Dark stories of a couple exploiting a young homeless girl down on her luck emerged, and it seems other folks were involved as well. A sordid tale I won't go into here out of respect, in case her family were to read this post. I drove by a couple days later and the investigation was winding down and only a cruiser or two were maintaining security. That is when I decided to call into the state police with the story about the backhoe that Captain Hook had told me. The next day, the crime scene was abuzz again. I suspect they were searching for other cadavers. Although the couple was never charged, they both remain in prison on other charges, the last I knew. So, the lesson for me was, see something, say something. Oh, and hitchhikers these days are getting too damn sketchy. I put this story somewhere around when I was in middle school, I believe. It was nearing the end of summer, soon to be going back to school. My second cousin had gotten a new apartment, 2-story, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, big kitchen, and big living room. At the time, it was perfect for her at the time boyfriend, now husband, and her one child. She has 2 more kids now. She invited us to spend the night with her, me and my elder sibling. Mom preferred staying at home, but wanted to see the apartment still. We all loved it. Nice complex, right by the school. A few bad neighbors, but May loved it for my cousin nonetheless. And she was happy to have it. The neighborhood kids saw us while my mom and cousin were talking, spoiling my cousin's child, who was still a baby. Me and my sister talked with the kids, toys, games, where we from, etc. One older kid looked behind us to the apartment, chuckling. Can't believe y'all moved in here. Man, I remember when that old lady... My cousin immediately walked over, cutting the boy off, and told the kids it was time to leave. They did. We said goodbye to our mom and we went inside. It was just me, my elder sibling, my cousin, and her baby now. By then, I forgot what the boy was saying because we started playing video games, playing with the baby, all good things. That night is when crap got started. It was quiet, eerily so. The TV was on, but it was muted. My cousin was asleep in her bed with her baby, while me and my siblings slept on the floor with some blankets and sheets. Something woke me up, and I looked around to find nothing out of place. Everyone was still asleep, so what woke me up? I stretch out, curl on my side to go back to sleep when I hear it. I could feel the sound. One of my hand was touching the hardwood floor, and I could feel a bit of the vibrations due to how thin the blankets were. My sibling was awake, looking over at me. You heard it too? They whispered. I lowered my head to the cover to continue talking and not wake my cousin up. This is the conversation that followed in whispers. Me. How long has it been going on? Them. I don't know, but it woke me up. I just didn't say anything since cousin name hasn't done anything. By then, I felt slightly nervous, anxiously looking towards the closed door. Her boyfriend wasn't here. He was gone with friends since we spent the night, so what was making the noise? Me. Should we wake her up? Cousin. be quiet, and go back to sleep. Her sudden yet sleepy voice makes me and my sibling flinch. I quickly lift my upper body up to stare at her, finding my cousin still laying down with her eyes closed. Me. I was just thinking about going to the bathroom but hesitated. A lie. I didn't have to go, but my child brain was curious, and I'll be damned if I was going to lay there knowing someone was in her house without permission. Again, child brain. I was curious as hell. To this day, I still look back and want to smack my younger self over the head. My cousin told me to go to the bathroom, and my sibling looked at me nervously. They didn't want me to open the bedroom door. Who knows what's on the other side? I was younger than them, yet braver, or stupid. I walked out, pulled the door closed until it was only a crack. It was cold, not just my bare feet touching the floor. The entire apartment was cold, minus my cousin's bedroom. The bathroom was about 5 steps away, giving you the chance to look down the stairs and see the front door. I stood there for a few seconds at the top of the stairs, waiting, watching with my hands clenched into fists. I could see moonlight coming through the small window on the front door, creating a small lit path on the floor in front of it. Everything else was dark and quiet. By then, my cousin was irritated, calling me back into the bedroom. I told her I was going to the bathroom. She told me to hurry up. I flushed the toilet to make it seem like I really did use it, turned the water on, and started back into her bedroom. As soon as the door was closed, now I knew what the sound was. It was like someone coming up the stairs, yet didn't come all the way up. The sound was faster, not slow like the first time I heard it. I sneaked a glance towards my cousin, who watched me as I laid back down, telling me and my sibling to go back to sleep. We did, and the next morning our mom came to get us. My cousin at the last moment tried to get us to stay after looking over her boyfriend's work schedule. My mom kept saying no, since we had school the next day. Finally, after some back and forth, my mom asked her, "Mom, why you want them to stay so badly? Boyfriend name isn't here." Cousin: "He's working, but I miss y'all and I want to spend more time with y'all." Mom: "Not buying it for one damn second." What's the real reason?" Cousin: "Nothing, an old lady died in there. They found her at the bottom in her nightgown. She didn't fall though. It seemed like she died going up the stairs. I heard someone died in this neighborhood. I remember seeing the ambulance when I drove by one time on my way to work, but I didn't know it was my apartment." My mom immediately shook her head, saying me and my sister weren't coming back, and neither was she. Nobody wanted to stay in that apartment. Not my aunt, not my cousin's sister, not even the boyfriend. He wanted them all to move out, but my cousin was happy to have her own apartment. He took overtime, so he wouldn't be there at the apartment long. It wasn't but a few days later, my cousin fully moved out and into another apartment in a different neighborhood. In the later years, another family member moved into that neighborhood. I remember looking towards the apartment. It looked empty, like it has been for a while. When I asked the family member about the apartment, he laughed, saying, "Nobody want to live in there. Everyone who lived or lives here says it's haunted." I stayed silent, only nodding slowly. The noise we heard while staying with my cousin was footsteps, always sounded near the bottom of the steps. I stopped thinking about it, but now that I'm typing this out, I wonder, was it the old lady who was haunting the apartment? Why? Is she still there? Maybe one day. I'll drive through the neighborhood. Maybe things changed these last few years. Back in 2008, I used to date a girl who lived in Abergavenny, South Wales, UK. This is a very old Welsh market town with various old buildings and a vast ancient history. Anyway, my ex, let's call her C, used to live in this old toll house with her sister and mother on the corner of what used to be the main road many hundreds of years ago. It has the classic Tudor look with exposed black timber beams crisscrossing white painted stone walls. Although the house had extensive renovation in the early 1900s, the site of the toll house and layout had remained unchanged for several hundred years. The downstairs lounge room was set quite low into the ground, with the house effectively built on an embankment, meaning the rear wall of the lounge was under the natural ground level. C would mention how behind the rear wall in the lounge, there used to be an old access tunnel that led to the nearby castle some 500 m away, the ruins of which are still there. The tunnel had collapsed hundreds of years ago, and the entrance to the tunnel boarded over. This rear wall even had the remains of the tunnel's stone entryway archway as a feature, but was blocked off beyond a single layer of masonry. It was common in medieval times for monks at monasteries and castles to use access tunnels to travel in and out of the grounds and out of the townships. Anyway, the collapsed tunnel behind the lounge room wall always used to intrigue me, as it always had a cold draft, no matter what time of day it was, which I never thought much of. That was until strange things started to happen. The first curious event that occurred was when I wasn't actually there. I was on the phone to C one evening, chatting away about our days at school and any other rubbish 15, 16 years olds talk about. Suddenly, mid-sentence, I heard a whoosh and a loud bang, and C let out of a tiny yelp on the other end of the phone. Silence. I asked if she was okay. She eventually, after about 5 seconds of deafening silence, responded shakily, "Yes, but my science textbook just flew off my shelf from across the room at me, and then brushed it off as if it was nothing." "Wait, what?" I asked her, to which C replied, "Yeah, it happens all the time. My house is very haunted." She was very casual about it, and I found that quite comforting, considering I was staying there that coming weekend. But it also made me think, this is normal for her? Nothing happened for some time, but one evening about 2 months later, we were sat watching TV in the lounge downstairs, and I heard what sounded like her little sister shuffling around upstairs. "How long has your sister been home?" I asked, to which C replied, "She isn't home yet. Nobody is. She just texted me." We looked up at the ceiling above as we clearly heard more shuffling footsteps on the upstairs level, creaking the floorboards. The footsteps sounded almost muffled and almost soft, like someone who has only just woken up. Hard to explain, but definitely footsteps. We were both very creeped out, but went up the stairs to check no one had broken in via the rear window. A burglar had come in via that window recently. We found absolutely no one there, and all windows and doors closed. We went into C's bedroom and closed the door behind us, leaving it slightly ajar, and sat quietly trying to see if we could hear the footsteps again. After several minutes of sitting in the quiet, uneasy atmosphere, we decided to go head back downstairs as we heard nothing. The next thing that happened is something I will never forget. As I approach the bedroom door, I reach out the handle to gently push it open. The door was only open a sliver and not on the latch. As my hand was about to clasp the door handle, the door slammed in my face with the loudest bang ever, like someone had shoulder barged it from the opposite side. Instinctively, I tried to turn the door handle to open the door, but I could feel the force of someone trying to turn against me. The knob turned with some resistance, as if someone was holding it, but then it snapped back too closed with force. The only way I can describe it is like an actually person was on the other side of the door playing a prank on us and holding the doorknob as hard as they could and leaning all of their body weight into the door itself. I could even heard the old timber door creaking under the pressure of something pushing it hard from the other side. Then suddenly, after a few seconds, the resistance disappeared. I turned the doorknob and the door swung open freely. There's absolutely no way a person would have done that and then hidden somewhere in the house that quickly. We rushed from room to room and found no one hiding. All windows closed and the front door still locked from the inside. It suddenly occurred to me that as I was closing the door before it slammed, the sliver of light from the ajar door was gone. It was pitch black, as if it was the dead of night on the landing, or something very dark and translucent was blocking the light coming through the fend of the gap in the door from floor to ceiling. The image of this still creeps me out to this day. If from then on, things literally started to go bump in the night. One night I stayed over in the guest room and got up for a pee at around 3 a.m., toilets downstairs. When I was heading back to the base of the stairs, I heard a loud thump from the lounge room. I stared into the pitch black beyond the old, crooked doorway leading into the lounge room. I could tell the thump was coming from the rear wall, like someone's fist softly hitting a hollow plasterboard wall, as if someone or something was behind the hollow wall where the collapsed tunnel entrance was. I stood there in frozen shock, my eyes watering with pure fear, like I've never experienced before. I then bolted upstairs and woke up C. We sat on her bedroom floor, listening to this thumping going on for what seemed like 30 minutes or so, getting slower and softer and eventually disappearing. I'm sure other events happened there that I didn't notice. Her mom used to drink a lot and tell us vague stories of the moaning she had heard from behind the lounge room wall most nights. I even saw C's bedroom door open behind her on webcam on its own, and her mirror getting thrown off her wall and smashing on the ground. Whatever was in that house had a sad but sinister feeling to it. We broke up not so long afterwards, and I never went back there, but I did drive past the house recently, some 16 years later, and it gave me the chills like nothing else in a long time. Been reading a lot of stories on here lately, and it made me start thinking about some of my own paranormal experiences. Not a whole lot to it, but it is one of the most viscerally horrifying things that has ever happened to me. Back in 2016, I was in a long-term relationship with this girl whose family lived in a small town in Connecticut. We'd been dating for a little over a year, and I'd met her parents a few times, but this was our first time actually driving down and staying at her childhood home. I was already a little nervous about crashing with her parents and making a good impression, but she assured me everything would be fine. The whole drive down was incredibly scenic, and the town itself had all the usual trappings of a cute colonial town. We pulled up to the place, and it's this beautiful 3-story old house half sitting on a hill overlooking a big green yard. Her parents greeted us and were super welcoming, leading us into an open foyer with a dark wooden staircase. The house was clearly very old, but in a nice, cozy sort of way. It had clearly been remodeled from those old-school New England homes with some slight modern touches. My ex said we'd be sleeping in the guest room upstairs because her childhood bedroom only had a skinny single bed. She made sure to qualify, though, that her house is sort of haunted, and the guest room is where most of the ghost activity had centered around. I asked her to clarify what that meant, and she said her brother had slept in the room a couple times and weird stuff had happened while he was in there. She didn't really elaborate any further, and in a way, I could tell she was trying to downplay it or not freak me out. She did say, though, that pretty much everyone in her family had one strange experience or another while living in the house. When her dad was remodeling the kitchen, he was home alone working and sat down to take a break. While he was sitting in silence drinking some water, he suddenly felt a hand strong grip his right shoulder from behind. He jumped out his chair and looked around, but no one was there. He's a completely normal, non-superstitious guy, and when I asked him about it, he said he thought a spirit was trying to warn him not to make changes to the house. Another time, my ex was home alone with her dog watching TV downstairs, and all of a sudden, she heard loud banging footsteps walking down the hall, upstairs. As the footsteps continued down the hall, she could swear she heard someone banging on the walls, slowly approaching the top of the staircase. Her dog ran to the bottom of the stairs and started barking like crazy. She grabbed her phone, grabbed the dog, seeing nothing at the top of the stairs, and ran outside. She called her parents and called the police while watching the house from the sidewalk a little ways away. From where she was situated, she could see both entrances to the house, and the way the windows are set up, you couldn't jump out a second-story window without breaking your legs. The police searched the place and found no one, and her family chalked it up to a ghost. There has also been some smaller, spooky stuff that has happened, like their attic door closing on its own. Even if they put a chair in front of the door when they go up to get something, they'll come back down the stairs to find the door closed. For some reason, that irked me the most, and I refused to go up there. Anyway, the actual experience I had was my first night staying there. We were settling down to go to bed in the guest room, and I remember being slightly bothered by the lighting in the room. It just felt off, or slightly uncanny. It was both very bright and dim at the same time. I figured I was just tired, and we climbed into bed and slowly nodded off to sleep. Now, I don't know if I was dreaming before this happened, but in the middle of me being asleep, a woman appeared in my dreams. She was violently angry and started addressing me directly. She showed me people in my life that I loved, my ex, family, friends, and she started putting broken glass into their gums, scraping against their teeth. I was just frozen. In the dream, I couldn't even react. She told me that she was going to torture and kill everyone I cared about. She promised me that everything she was saying was very real. I tried to wake up and was mentally struggling against whatever grip she had on me, and for a second, I did wake up. I was in bed sitting in the darkness, and then somehow the woman transmuted from the previous dream to this new one and screamed, "You will never escape." I woke up for real this time, bolting upright, screaming and violently shaking. This woke my girlfriend up, and she immediately tried to calm me down, asking what was wrong. I started crying, trying to recount to her what had just happened and how viscerally real and f***ed up it was. She reassured me that it was just a dream, and I slowly started to calm down a little. I was genuinely afraid to go back to sleep, but we ended up somehow being able to nod back off, and I made it to morning without any other incident. We stayed at the house in that room a couple more times over the years after that, and I never had a dream like that again. You could probably chalk it up to the power of suggestion, being in a new place, being told that the guest room had ghost activity, but that is the only time before or since that I've ever had a true night terror or woken up screaming. I have never had a dream that even approaches the level of intensity to that one. I honestly don't know what to make of it. It's probably just my brain freaking out, but as a first-timer in that house, it felt like a warning. My family and I think there is something living by the trail behind our house. A bit of explanation, the trail is a bit far from the back of our house, about a 3-minute walk to get to the trail. There is a large field beside the trail that has a pond with a few frogs and other things. I like to catch frogs and release them. Our first encounter with this thing was when my family, mostly my sister and I, were down by that pond catching frogs. It was late to the point of pitch blackness. We have no streetlights near where we live besides on the main highway and one on the road not far from where we were heading, so we only had one good flashlight and one bad one. We started to hear bushes moving behind us. We were freaked out because it was a silent night, meaning that there was no wind. We got creeped out because it sounded like a big animal, and for all we know, it could have been a coyote, and started to head down the road. As we got to the road, we heard something following us. We ended up walking halfway down the road back to our house. We forgot to turn our flashlights off, and we turned back because we heard something was following us. There was a little concrete wall because of construction going on in that field. We then shined our flashlights around and saw a pair of eyes just watching us and moving around. They shined in the light like animal eyes. The only big animals around us are coyotes. I will explain why I don't think it's a coyote in a minute. Back to what I was explaining before, where that concrete wall is a dim street light. We ended up watching it as we left it look like it didn't want to go into that streetlight and was purposely staying out of it. We then got home and didn't really think much about it at the time because we thought it was just an animal. Now, this was my sister's story. A bit after that first encounter, my sister and one of her male friends went to that pond about the same time at night. About a month after the first encounter, my sister was going to find rocks over there until her friend saw something. A figure with eyes just like that night. He told her that he sees eyes over the same bushes, and I forgot to mention these bushes are tall, probably around 7 feet or taller or 213 centimeters. They soon left after getting scared. The last encounter was in the sundown. My sister and I were right outside our house, just having come back from an outing. I suddenly spotted a white figure near our house, just in the field. It was just standing there. It had no features from what I could see. It was quite literally just standing there. We just stared at it, but soon went inside when we got too creeped out. If anyone has an explanation for this, please help. Our house is most likely haunted too. I'm 19 years old, and February 2024, Elle became homeless and been bouncing from house to house. The first place I stayed at is with a friend at the time, let's call her Leah. I'm going to give her a little backstory to understand how she is, She has a drinking problem even though she's only 18 years old and 7 months after we graduated high school. She had gotten a felony and other charges because she was caught drinking and driving and had other substances in the car with her. When I got kicked out, I had this massive fight with my mom, and I chose to actually leave because I feared I would never be able to leave her household, and for my own personal safety if I ever went back. So this one night, we were in Leah's room just talking, and I wasn't trying to think about what had happened between me and my mom. Leah asked if I wanted to smoke some bud and drink with her, so I decided why not. We smoked a blunt and we were talking about personality disorders, and I didn't know why she knew so much about it, and she eventually told me she had a personality disorder, and she randomly switches to different mindsets where she acts completely different, and I kind of noticed it about her when we would hang out at my mom's house. First, she'd be all energetic and happy, and the next she would act completely different, where she would get mad and depressed and just want to drink. Back to the conversation we were having, she just gets dead serious and looks me in the eye saying, "I know you know when I switch." And my heart just dropped because the look in her eyes, they weren't the normal brown she usually has. They were a dark black, and I kind of got scared at her statement, and I played it off saying, "Yeah, sometimes, but I don't really notice." And she's like glaring at me, and she gets silent for a bit and acts normal after that and continues the conversation like nothing happened. Then she tells me about the time where she played the Ouija board with her friend, and they were in her friend's house, which they were renovating. So they play the game when it's dark outside, and they had been drinking before they played the Ouija board. And I'm Native American, and I always been told not to be outside when it's dark. And when you're drinking, spirits could potentially see you and start following you around. So she tells me that they had a whole setup with candles and everything and made sure no one was there and start asking questions. And of course, the planchette starts moving, and her friend asks if it's her dead grandmother talking to them, and it moves to yes. And her friend gets emotional and starts crying because she can hear a voice, but it definitely does not sound like an old woman. She tells me it sounded like an angry man, and her friend argues with her, saying it's her grandmother telling her she loves her and watches over her. And Leah actually gets freaked out because this voice she hears is an angry man telling her to get out of the house, and she looks around and she sees a black figure crouching in the corner, just staring at them. So she cuts the game short and tells me she was so freaked out, she never said goodbye, and some days had passed, and she found herself home with her dad and brother, and her room at the time was in the basement. She tells me she was in her room getting ready for school, and she hears someone just randomly say her name clear as day, and she goes upstairs and asks what her dad needed her for, and he tells her that he never said her name. So she asks her brother what he needed, and he also says he never called her name either, and they all get confused because she tells them she heard someone say her name. Another day passes, and she's sleeping in her room, and she wakes up and looks around because she can feel someone staring at her, and she looks in the corner of her room, and she sees this shadow man, as she calls it, just up in the corner, sitting like how Spider-Man clings to the wall. She said after that she never slept in her room until she moved in with her grandmother. She just stops the story there, and I was feeling a little freaked out. After that story, and for the month I was staying with her, I was having nightmares about my family dying every night. But also, she had this huge mirror in her room where it was like 7 feet long and 5 foot wide, and her room small, so I slept on the floor in front of it. Call me superstitious, but I don't like mirrors facing towards you when you sleep because I fully believe at night mirror portals open, and whatever is on the other side can see you. And things ended bad between us because she had her mom come at me all mad, telling me I was saying all these things about Leah I never said. I remember Leah telling me she hears voices, so whatever is attached to her must have said things to her, and she's believed whatever it said. I'm still mad that she wanted to end things that way and hope I never see her again. But I'm doing good now, I'm on good terms with my mom again, and I just moved into my own apartment in July and have a job that has good pay, so that's all that matters. I remember it clear as day. A few months ago I was in the hospital because I was diagnosed with complete heart failure at the age of 16. I had lived at the hospital for 3 whole months, but these 2 weeks I am talking about is weird. Every week they would have nurses working the day shift and the night shift. The night shift nurses were always good, but there was something off about one of them. This night I was doing my usual routine. The day nurses would always give me privacy, and usually the phlebotomist would come to draw blood for my heart transplant. This night was different. I heard this really deep laugh. Then this large man came in the room before I went to shower. Mind you, I had my mom help me because it was really to do it with an IV pole. I asked for some privacy because most of the night nurses gave me some privacy when showering, but this guy kept peeking his head through the door, giving me a perverted look. When I got out, I said, "I'm glad I'm not the only tall guy here." Then he said, "That makes us closer together," with a really creepy smile, and then he put his hand on my shoulder and tried bringing me closer. I told him, "Hey, it's getting pretty late, I should get to bed." So I climbed in the hospital bed, and he did his nightly checkup until it came to the eye checkup. When he shined the light in my eyes, he sounded flirty, saying, "You have pretty eyes." I was gonna smack him for that. Why would he say that to 16-year-old dude? My mom gave me that look, and I knew that in her head, she told me there was something off about this guy. It was really hard to sleep that night because he wouldn't leave the room. He would sit there watching my mom sleep. When I peeked my eyes a little, he had the creepiest stare. I call it the skinwalker stare. I saw his hand just about touch my mom's foot. Luckily, the IV pump beeped and woke me and my mom up. He walked over and smacked it, calling it a mother F. And it cur, and my mom told him to step out. The next night he was back, I was hooked to lipids and fat because I was having trouble eating. The bag leaked all over the place. Then he came to pick it up and say with the dumbest sounding voice, "Did you have an accident?" I explained no. Then he got pissed that he had to clean it. I had a dream that night that he was touching me very inappropriately. IDK if it was the meds I was on. But that morning I saw my blanket laying on the chair like in the dream. I told the charge nurse that I don't want him, so she agreed. I had to go into surgery that day. After 1 week, the man was back creepier than ever. When I did my nightly walk around ICU, I was walking fast. He was so slow I worn him out and made him tired of walking. When I got in bed, my blanket was on my chest. He was trying to take the blanket off, and I grabbed my blanket. He was yelling quietly, "No, no, no." Then he was messing with one of the lines that go into the heart. When he was messing with it, hurt my arm so bad, I screamed, "Jesus Christ." And he said, "WW, what happened?" And I smacked his hand so hard, and I yelled, "Cut your shit out, or I will report you to the charge nurse." Then he charged out of the room. I told my mom about it. She said, "Good job." I remember the rest of the night he would still come in the room. This time he just sat by my bed, breathing in my face, touching my hair. I woke up and told him, "Get the hell out, man." Then he explained to me I thought we were together, then he left. Thank God, as told myself. The heart transplant surgery came and it went well. If it didn't well, I wouldn't be telling this story. They took me out of ICU and put me in a regular hospital room. When I left ICU, I looked down the hallway and I seen the man staring at me with his head tilted, smiling and waving. I told the nurses that I had in the cardiac care unit about him, and they said that he has gotten a lot of complaints by patients. The complaints weren't that big of a deal, but the last one had me scared. It said making patients feel uncomfortable. I remember my mom told him where I'm from. Luckily, she didn't tell me where my house was because he told everybody where I lived, and I saw him Google Earthing my hometown. I'm just glad my mom was there when he was around because I bet if she wasn't there, it would have been a bad outcome. Years ago, I used to do yard work for an aunt while I was pregnant and in between jobs. At the time, she was helping an older couple in their 50s out that was down on their luck, William and Jenny. They were staying in my aunt's house trying to get back on their feet, and William also did repairs around the house in exchange for their room there. One day, I was out in the yard, and I noticed William outside staring at the road. He was a very quiet guy, kind, but didn't have much to say usually. He looked very troubled for some reason, so I asked him if he was all right. "Yes, well, I guess," he replied. "I've always tried to be empathic to others, regardless of me knowing them very well." I told him if anything was bothering him or if he just needed to talk about or vent, if it was something I could help with, I was happy to just listen. "Well," he replied. He pulled his cigarette case out of his pocket, snapped his Zippo lighter open, and took a long drag of a cigarette. I didn't really notice he smoked before this day. He started telling me about where he and Jenny had been staying before they were living at my aunt's house. They had a very broken down small RV that still could run, and they'd drive it different places and park for the night. One night, they parked on a dark and shabby part of town up in the city, about 30 minutes away from where my aunt's house was. It was a run-down area next to some old train tracks. It was after dark, not sure what time at night, but he did mention it was after dark and late. William told me the second they parked there, he just was hit with a horrible sense of anxiety, doom, fear. He couldn't describe it precisely. William was not a believer in the paranormal at this time, but he said he absolutely sensed something, and he said it didn't feel like a human presence. It just felt like evil was sharing space with us. William and Jenny had a small dog. Jenny was going to just take the dog out to use the bathroom, and Jenny didn't seem to feel what William was initially feeling. Jenny got the dog and went outside. William was standing alone in the RV when the RV door swung right open on its own. He said he called for Jenny. She didn't answer. All of a sudden, he felt an ice-cold chill, and he heard something, almost like heavy breathing and low-toned snarling. He just heard it, didn't see anything. Then all of a sudden, he could feel heavy footsteps running right towards him, and then he felt something go through him. He said his entire body went ice-cold. The smell of sulfur was in the air, and he felt paralyzed for a few moments. He fell and got back up and flew out of the RV. He couldn't find Jenny and was screaming for her. Then she suddenly appeared, seemingly out of breath. The dog had ran off as soon as she took him out. The dog was shaking and seemed to be terrified by something, and neither one of them ever saw the dog look that way. They got their things and immediately left that area. William told me that it felt demonic. Whatever that was wanted him and wanted to harm him. It took months to tell Jenny what happened in that RV while she was outside with the dog. William was shaking, telling the story, the quiet guy that he was, and how scared he looked talking about it. I absolutely believe that all happened. He said occasionally after that, he'd have flashbacks of that presence going through his body and the ice-cold chill that enveloped his body, the feelings of pure fear and paralysis. Feeling whatever that was wasn't human and wanted to harm him. Never, ever felt anything like that, he said under his breath. He lit another cigarette. This happened 10+ years ago. Sorry if some of this is hard to read. I'm definitely not a professional storyteller, but listening to him describe this has been something that's never left my mind, and I've always wondered what was really out there by those rundown train tracks. So this happened years ago, and this is the first time anyone besides my family has heard this story, so I'd like to hear someone else's opinion about it. I have a very large family on my mom's side, and I have always been close to my cousins, from my mother's sister in particular. They have 8 children and make a decent amount of money, so naturally they live in a big house on a good amount of land. Around 5 years ago, I went to their house every day to hang out with them. We were all homeschooled, so naturally we had a lot of free time to play and just be kids. My aunt and uncle have about 4 acres of land, but only 1 acre isn't covered in woods, so that the only part of the yard you can play in, though we spent a decent amount of time in the woods. One day, after we had gone to their house and played outside for most of the day, me and my oldest cousin, who was 15 at the time and still claims this is what happened at 20 years old, went inside to hang out as it was getting dark, and without lights, it was almost impossible to see in the woods at all. The middle child of their family, who at the time was 8 years old, was still outside with my sister, and they were playing for a while. But then the both ran into the basement door from the outside, where me and my cousin were planning on playing video games. My cousin was crying and my sister was noticeably terrified, but neither of them could get out a word that they were so out of breath and in shock. So when we asked what was wrong, my cousin, with tears rolling down her face, pointed out, used to the tree line, now the basement door is completely glass, and from it you can usually see the whole yard from inside, but their yard is at such a hill. If you look out while sitting, you can't see the bottom of the tree line, so we both stood up and walked to door, looking outside where a man in a white suit was standing about 2 feet away from the woods with a hat on. We couldn't see his face. He looked like he was wearing gloves, but it was so obviously a person standing there. We naturally flipped out and sprinted upstairs to tell my aunt and uncle, who were in the kitchen. By the time we got up there and told them there was someone out there, he had completely vanished, and we never saw him again. And to this day, me and my cousin both agree it was a man in a white suit. Now, the second part of this story comes from my other cousin, who is one of the You Ever sisters from the same family. She is older than me, but her, then the first boy of the family who saw the white suit man. When she was 15, so a year or two after the first time we saw the WSM, she was moved from her room upstairs to the basement room, which had a window that opened up to backyard similar to the back door. She only stayed in that room for 1 week. During her time sleeping, she claims to have had consistent dreams of someone watching her from the window the first 3 nights while she was staying there. The 4th night, she was in the basement. I had stayed the night with the oldest boy, and we were upstairs in the middle of the night making popcorn. It was around 1 or 2 at night, I'm not sure, but it had been hours since everyone in the house had gone to bed. But as we were making popcorn, my cousin, who we thought was sleeping, came running up the steps crying and telling us there was someone looking in her window. Remember, she was 15 at the time, so not a young child by any means. Now, we were shocked, but we figured it was just a nightmare, since she was clearly still asleep, even though she was actively in the kitchen, saying stuff and had her eyes slightly open. We had seen this before in some of our other younger siblings when they had nightmares. Needless to say, we were shocked, and my aunt heard her and came to put her back to sleep, but she didn't sleep downstairs that night and moved upstairs a couple days later. Finally, I don't know if these are related, but it seems to me that they were. We haven't had anything happen since, and it's been a very long time, but what's y'all's opinion? This happened almost 3 years ago. During COVID, I was sort of lost and extremely bored without human interaction. This was until me and my buddies found mountain biking when our parents allowed us to see each other outside. Living in Washington State, there is lots of woods perfect for MTB, mountain bike trails. Us being under the age of 16 at the time, we had no license to drive to any actual mountain bike parks, so instead we built them. Apart from the one trail already near our house with a 30-foot gap jump, which was way above our skill level, we wanted to make something new. Basically, there is an entrance to this trail near my friend's house, and you walk down it a ways until you find the normal trail. To get to our trail, you find this one spot on the trail that turns 90 degrees to the left, but instead go to the right off the trail. Through all this mud, weave between these fallen trees and tree branches, and from there, you go right where it sort of curls around until it goes straight again. From there, you go straight through this small pathway, which is still hidden from all the ferns until you reach this abandoned forest road. Now, you follow the forest road down, which goes for around 80 yards or so. It is also covered in a huge amount of mud, and if you were there, you would see all the clumps with our footprints going about 6 or so inches deep, and even deeper in some spots. There are more fallen trees on this forest road, but if you continue to make your way down until it sort of stops, and then go off to the right and walk around this hidden pathway that weaves and curls all around this huge area of ferns for maybe another 60 or so yards, you finally reach the bottom of the trail we made. It probably takes about 10 minutes to get there, but around 5 on a good day where it isn't wet, like during the summer. Essentially, you have no reason to be there unless you're either lost, which it's almost impossible to do unless you purposely wander off trail or are looking for it. On this particular day, my buddies couldn't go out to help build, so I decided to bring my younger siblings along. Only reason I felt scared going alone was around a week earlier, me and one of my friends thought we found a cougar den with some scat nearby in a few spots. I also just didn't want to be alone that far out. My sister decided to come with, but my brother, I guess, had a friend who he was going to hang out with. Anyways, me and my sister ride our bikes there, carry them through the hidden area, and throw them off into some fern bushes right before you get to the forest road. From there, we went to the trail. The main reason I was out there was to be sure no trees had fallen because we had some extreme winds the days prior, and so we knew if we needed to bring some bigger saws to cut them. There wasn't any damage, but around a week later, a tree did end up blocking the end of the trail, ironically. It is also important I mention it was a rainy day. We were there for around 10 minutes while I showed my sister the trail. All of a sudden, I get this call from my mom telling me my brother was asking where we were since he was going to come find me. I guess he had a change of plans or something, but me being lazy told my sister to go walk back down and wait outside the trail entrance on the neighborhood to wait for him. This would also give me the opportunity to do some work. I called her every few minutes or so since my brother should have arrived, but he didn't. About 10 minutes go by, so she has been waiting for 20 minutes when my mom called me again, telling me he had returned and couldn't find us. At this point, I was kind of annoyed, but called my sister telling her to come back and to make sure nobody was around or following her for when she entered the trail, as to not give our spot away. I was waiting from anywhere between 7-10 minutes when I was wondering what was taking her so long. So when I walked over to the end of the forest road and I saw her walking all the way on the other side, I was relieved. She wasn't waking on the forest road yet, but she was perpendicular to it, walking towards it. From this angle, the bushes go from anywhere between hip to shoulder height, and so I could see her upper body with her hood on. This is when I realized that I didn't remember her wearing a white sweatshirt windbreaker. Once the person turned the corner, I could tell it indeed was not her and was likely a grown man. I quickly backpedaled off to the side and down the hill a little bit behind a tree so I could call my sister. I was wondering where she was and if she got lost, because after all, it was hard to get to. I also didn't want this person to steal our bikes, and oh, did I forget to mention my bike was over $2,000? Don't worry, I made it worth it for how much I ended up riding it. It is also going to last a lifetime if properly maintained. With my worries about my bike in mind, I called my sister, and the second I heard the first ring, I heard a voice on the other side of the tree I was hiding behind say, "What are you doing?" It was my sister. I quickly told her to get down as not to be seen by the person. I didn't want them to find the trail we were building, as I didn't want to get in any sort of trouble, and I wanted to keep it hidden. I also wanted to get back to the bikes. She could tell by the panic in my voice I was serious, and when I told her there was a person, and she looked, she said, "No, there isn't." I peeked over and sure enough, nobody was there. I knew what I saw though, and so we made our way back, walking past where I saw the person. I was worried the bikes would be gone, so as we trekked through the mud and my heart was pumping, I couldn't help the feeling of being watched. I could feel the adrenaline rush, and I almost knew they were off in the trees watching us. I was so distracted thinking they were going after the bikes when I saw them disappear, I didn't even think they would be hiding. Thankfully, as we made our way last and down the trail while acting as calmly as possible, we arrived to see bikes, which were still indeed there. At one point, it did look like there was a different shoe print because it was slightly larger and differently shaped, but it was hard to tell in this area. Now, we made our way all the way back, while I constantly looked behind me, making sure we weren't being followed. Towards the end, where the trail splits off and leads to the neighborhood, there is a short but wide wooden bridge, which is covered in dirt. Thankfully, since it was raining and you can easily see footprints, I could see the extra pair. You could vividly see my first set of footprints to get to the trail, as well as my sister's, with an additional set of her footprints going back and then returning, and then a shoe print on top of hers, showing it was most recent. This confirmed my sighting. My heart dropped once again, and we quickly got out of there, still making sure nobody else was behind us. When I got home, I didn't hesitate to tell my parents, who only told me that next time I need to be with her at all costs then. I could tell they partly didn't believe me or thought I was over-exaggerating. All these questions went through my head. On one side, we live in a nice neighborhood, and even if it was a random person who didn't live there, why were they there? If they were maybe worried about why a random little girl was wandering off into the trails, why did they even bother following? And when they did, why so far behind and so creepily? Why not call out? If it was a worker, why were they wearing what they were wearing? Wouldn't there have been boot prints? Be wearing a vest or helmet? A truck parked outside the trail? Wouldn't they have something else with them? Why hide? If they thought she was alone originally and they walked past two bikes, why did they keep going? It wasn't until they must have saw her taking to me or just saw me when they hid. Why did I feel like I was being watched when I was under the assumption the person was off stealing my bike and not even near us anymore? Why the footprints entering but no going back? Why is someone hiking in an area like this in that attire? How did they even find the area by themselves? They definitely found it because of my sister, and when they did, why follow? When they saw how hard it was to navigate, why keep going? Why feel the need to hide from two younger kids? Most importantly, what would have happened if I wasn't there? Anyways, I feel the need to explain some details. The footprints were maybe half an inch to an inch bigger than my shoes. My shoes were smaller at the time since they were beaters, but regardless, my guess is this person was anywhere from 2 inches shorter than me to 2 inches taller. I couldn't see their face, but they were definitely white or had lighter skin. I'm gonna be honest and tell you that the person wasn't this huge, massive being to make it sound scary, but they definitely didn't fill out their sweatshirt or coat, so they weren't super scary looking, but definitely much bigger than me at the time. At this point in time, I believe I was around 5'8" and 130 pounds, so pretty small at the time. It's also important to note that maybe they were innocent. However, I still always wonder what would have happened if I wasn't there. The man in the black van. I was laying in bed one night, unable to sleep, when a memory resurfaced. It was one I'd occasionally think about, or rarely retell, but tonight it struck me as particularly disturbing, maybe because it's the sort of thing you can only completely appreciate the possible implications of it when you're an adult. I'm not sure if this story belongs here, but it is true nonetheless. I'm around 13 years old, getting ready for school one morning. My dad is off at work, and my mom is getting ready for hers, I think. Every day, I'd walk to school, as it's only about half a mile from my home. I'm ready and head out the door saying goodbye. I walk down the hill of my yard and down the curved street in the direction of the school, out of sight of my house, but not far. I reach where my neighborhood ends, where I would cross the street and towards the intersection of the school. Before I do, a dingy-looking black minivan van, not sure how to describe it, pulls up in front of my path, poised in front of the road parallel to my neighborhood. A car I have never seen before in my neighborhood, nor since. I look at him. He's looking at me. It's a pasty Caucasian man who looks like he's in his 30s at least. He has disheveled brown hair, but what struck me was his eyes. He had dark circles under them and a very uncomfortable stare. His window is still up. He then motions me towards him with his hand. My heart begins to pound. Every part of me is saying this is not a good man. So I just stand there, look at him, and shake my head no. A part of me had the feeling he was going to jump out, prepared to run, but he didn't. He didn't even respond to my gesture. He looked at me unfazed before briskly pulling out of the neighborhood into the road ahead, and he was gone. I don't remember what happened next. I think I ran home rather than toward school, as I was very startled. I told my mom either that morning or later that day, and she told my dad, who's a policeman. He called me into the living room. He was on his work laptop and wanted me to describe the man and the car for him. I didn't have much useful info to give, as I was a dopey middle school boy who wasn't prepared to memorize plates or was at all knowledgeable of cars. Unsurprisingly, my dad never found out anything more about this man with such sparse details. The day came and went as just an odd thing that happened to me, and nobody had any reason to bring it up again. Every so often, I would remember the time of this creepy man beckoning me towards him in his dingy black van, but only recently has the thought filled me with so much dread. It's possible that if I were to have just walked up to him, that I would never be seen or heard from again. Just another middle schooler who gets swallowed up by the world and disappears. No witnesses. Just an unsolved mystery and a forever grieving family. I shudder to think what could have happened to me, as I know now what people are capable of. Death isn't nearly the worst thing. Or maybe it's all in my head. Maybe he just wanted some directions or to ask me something, even though his window was closed and he looked unwell, to say the least. The worst part is, I'll never know. Maybe it was just the overblown anxiety of a kid taking things out of proportion. All I know is that every part of him was screaming to me, there's something wrong. Remembering how it felt looking into his eyes, I can't help but believe it. But what's worse, the idea that before or after it happened to me, he might have beckoned a kid who didn't shake their head no. Before I start, just want to say these are personal experiences and none of this is made up. The reason I'm making this post is I don't really have anyone to talk to about this, so just want your thoughts. There are too many things that have happened to note them all in this post, so I'll just go over some that stand out to me. When I was little, around 5, I had this dream I could see myself sleeping, and I was floating above. I then floated over to my parents' room and saw my parents fast asleep. After that, I don't remember anything. However, apparently, at that exact moment, my mom was having a similar dream where she saw me getting pulled out of the front door by some kind of shadow figure. Immediately at that same time, my mom heard a scream Earl and goes out to see what's going on. She sees the front door wide open and me looking like I'm going back to sleep. I've chalked it up to astral projection or something, but really IDK what that was. There's been a whole slew of other things that have happened that I won't get into right now, but what's been happening recently is really the main reason for this post. I keep hearing weird tapping, creaking noises in certain spots in my room at the most weirdest moments. Not sure how to explain it, but other people who have heard it in my room admit the sound is weird, but try to rationalize the sound as the house settling. Also, it's worth noting this is not the same house I was in as that last story. Another thing that happened somewhat recently is I was playing chess with my dad and had the pieces I had taken on the side of the table. Once the match is over, we go to put the pieces away and realize only one is missing. We both didn't drop anything or hide it. Literally searched the entire living room top to bottom and never found the piece. One other thing that happened in this same house was we were all in the living room playing a game or something, when we suddenly hear something break in the kitchen. Go to check it, and a bowl that was already on the counter broke literally in half just sitting on the counter. No one else was there. It didn't even shatter into a bunch of pieces. I believe this happened about 2 years ago now, so forgive me if there's some blank spaces in my thinking. I was about 15, 16 at the time, and relaxing in my room at night, watching YouTube, reading fanfics, as teen girls do. I was just messing around on my phone, not caring about much else, when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I turned to look to my open doorway, which is where I thought I saw something, and just barely through the darkness, saw my dad's blackened figure. I froze. Through the darkness, I could tell it was my dad, but it was strange. It didn't move, not even a little. It just stood there silently and motionless. And now that I look back on it, something else has hit me as well. I have a lot of string lights that are always on in my room because I've always been afraid of the dark. The soft yellow lights usually cast out through my doorway, pouring into the rest of the house a bit. The figure was standing in direct target of the light, yet it remained black. I stared at it for quite some time, expecting my dad to go, "What?" at any second so we could have a laugh about it, but that never happened. Instead, only a deafening silence filled the air. I'm really not sure why I did what I did next. I must have been overtired, therefore, not fully processing what was happening. I looked away for a second to put my phone down. When I looked back up, it was gone. I'm not sure how, but I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, my parents and my brother were all chatting in the dining room, making breakfast and such. I went to my dad almost immediately and told him about what happened the night before, asking him if it was indeed him. He asked me what time this happened, and I told him probably around 1 a.m., 3 a.m. I think we all have internal clocks, so that's kind of what I based my answer on, although I know they're obviously not always accurate, so I could have been wrong. My dad gave me a confused and somewhat concerned look and told me he only got up around his usual 4 a.m. to feed our cats and dog. Yeah, I know, waking up at 4 a.m. to do that sounds weird, but it's seriously something both my parents have always done. Sometimes, hearing them, I'll wake up and go out to get a drink of water and talk with them. But anyways, hearing this definitely creeped me out. I have never known my dad to be a sleepwalker, so even that option didn't seem to fit. Yet, I know that it was his figure that had been standing in my doorway the previous night. The morning went on, and eventually I found myself outside, hanging out in our driveway. I don't really remember what I was doing, however, I remember looking down the hill where the main road is and seeing my dad walking down it. I was confused, as he's not really the up-and-go walk kind of guy. I tried shouting down to him to get his attention, but he just kept walking until he was out of sight. But just then, I kid you not, my dad pops out of our chicken coop, having just finished taking care of their water and food for the day. I looked at him, now completely freaked out, and told him what I had just seen. He seemed almost equally as concerned, probably not only for what I'd told him, but for my well-being too. We both went inside and the day went on. Thankfully, I've never experienced anything like this again, and I hope it stays that way. I have no idea what those things were that I saw or why I was seeing them. I've been known to occasionally hallucinate at night when I'm overtired, but I can't recall any events around those days that could have made me that exhausted. I'm also not one to believe in the supernatural, but I'm also having a hard time coming up with a plausible explanation for these events. I feel that there must be an explanation somewhere, but it's certainly not one that I know. In around 2018-2019, I, 25 right now, at the time was 18-19, was living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in NE, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones, right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, etc. Plus, his parents were super cool and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, even though I was quite scared of the dark, so I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch black road with thick forest on both sides and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 4, a tall, slim woman, an average height, weight man, a child, short hair but couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing and couldn't see their face, maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered, but not nice. They also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street, the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking, had music playing, etc. They didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all, at the same time, stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looks to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of 3 reactions. They immediately think I'm cuckoo, think I'm lying, or have had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me, honestly. It was, and still is, the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery/assault/etc., or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option. I'm still wrapping my head around this one. It's been over 2 years since the last big event tied to all of this, but only recently have I been able to unpack it all and face it head on. Apologies for the length. This story has several chapters, as it all unfolded over a decade, beginning with a tragedy. My uncle, my mom's brother, took his own life by running a car in a closed garage. I've lost a lot of people and experienced a lot of deaths since then. My father passed away from terminal cancer just a few months after my uncle committed suicide, and then some of my friends throughout my 20s. 2 of my friends were murdered, one in a crossfire and one was executed in cold blood. Some of my friends have overdosed. Some of my craziest experiences have started in my sleep. I think maybe I become more open to receiving energy that's trying to get in when I'm asleep. Chapter 1: The Dream. One night, I have a dream that I'm back in the house that I grew up in. I'm in my old bedroom, and I walk out and step in front of the door to my dad's room. I'm afraid to push it open because I know something bad is on the other side. But I push it open and walk in to see my uncle, laying on a flat stainless steel table. There's a sheet covering him from his toes to his shoulders. He's not dead, but he's not awake. It looks like he's in a trance. Then this inky black cloud materializes into an energetic force and starts to attack me. The gusts are knocking me around, and I'm struggling to breathe as the inky blackness tries forcing its way into my lungs. The force is starting to overtake me, and I lash out wildly, letting out a primal scream. In that moment, I wake up in my bed screaming that primal scream and swatting at the air. I didn't want to break from my sleep completely and burrowed back into my bed to fall back into that dream and into the fight. Luckily, I was still on the cusp of sleep and slipped back into that moment in that room, unluckily still battling the cloud of pure hate and darkness. I wrestled with the force until it tired and retreated. I woke up feeling horrified and shaken. I've had sleep paralysis since I was a kid, and this was not that. No part of me was paralyzed. I was flailing around with full mobility. Chapter 2: The Party. I work as a private chef. This oftentimes entails of going to rental homes for groups of friends and preparing a multiple-course dinner. This dinner was booked through a catering company who contracted me to finish this dinner and serve it with their executive chef. The dinner was set in a beautiful travel destination, so I was stoked to go. This place is known for its spiritual power and tends to attract woo-woo types. The executive chef mentioned that this group of women were all psychics, mediums, and light workers. He said it in a mocking tone, but I was excited. Those are my kind of people, and I was curious to see if anyone could tell me anything about my dream. As expected, the women were all pretty toasted when we arrived. They'd been there on retreat for a few days, and this was their farewell dinner. We jumped right into finish and serving the food, and a few of the women were hanging around the kitchen island and chatting to us. I love interacting with the guests, so I was entertaining it and answering all of the questions. My associate was keeping his head down and dodging interaction, and much as possible. Then she tells me that I came in with 2 spirits. One was a teenage girl, a friend of mine who'd overdosed, and the other was my uncle, or my grandfather, my uncle, or my grandfather. I perked up. I'd always been very suspicious of people who claimed to speak to the dead, but she was dead on. My grandfather on my mother's side was still alive. My uncle was living with him when he took his life, in his garage. I asked her what my uncle was saying, hoping that she'd bring up the dream. She looked at me confused and said, "I've had a few drinks, so maybe that's why it's hard to tell what he's saying. Did he shoot himself in the head?" I shook my head no, he'd killed himself, but that wasn't how. My friend had been murdered and shot in the head, but that's not who she was talking about. She insisted that's the message she was getting. She said he was yelling, he shot himself. I shrugged and said it couldn't be aimed at me. We agreed that maybe it was attached to the chef. He refused to take part in the conversation, and I wondered if it had touched on a nerve. After finishing the dinner, we cleaned up, packed up, and hit the road back to the city. I wanted to talk about the medium and whatever she thought she was channeling. I asked him if he's ever experienced anything like that. To this day, his response is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. He said, "When you surround yourself with people who are into things like that, the next thing you know, people are taking drugs and riding around on the ground like snakes and speaking in tongues." So I dropped the subject and opted to speak about music instead. It was late, and it was a dark, desolate drive through the desert before we hit civilization. Chapter 3. The Fucking. Several weeks later, my niece was competing in her first karate competition since joining. I've always been into martial arts, and it's something that I used to do with my dad, so I was stoked for her. After the competition, we left to get breakfast and celebrate our girl showing out with her new team. Right when we pulled up, my mom called me. Her father had committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. "18 years ago. As a teen, my parents would send my sister and I up to NY for summer break. We'd go camping, four-wheeling, off-roading while hopping around from home to home, living among our relatives and friends. It was the best memories. There was one night, though, that terrified me and always stuck in my mind. I was out with a friend late at night, cruising in the car, windows down, listening to good music, having the best time. Anyway, a sequence of events led up to where we were being chased in our car, not going to elaborate on this part, and in an effort to hide, we went into a deeply wooded, long road that was some kind of a county park or wildlife preserve. I'm not sure exactly because it wasn't a place we planned to go to or knew about. It just looked like a dark place where we could hide for a bit. As we were speeding through the woods, it was so dark, not really any streetlights or signs, and we swerved into like a mini park opening type area, unpaved dirt road type, and our headlights revealed in the dark, in a clearing in the woods, a gathering of about 10 persons standing in a large circle, dressed in long white robes and white hoods. They were chanting in a low tone. As our headlights exposed them, they immediately turned to look in our direction. The hoods were all white, covering the whole face, just 2 holes for eyes. For a few seconds, we stared at them, and they stared back. Suddenly, one of them started sprinting at us in the car. My friend started cursing. I was screaming as he slammed on the gas and reversed out of there. We got out of there and made it home eventually. It was well after midnight, and I just remember us sitting quietly in the car in shock. We had no idea what we just saw. We figured it was the KKK or something, but we never talked about it again after that night. This was before the smartphone era, and it was before the Google everything mentality, so it never came to my mind to research it until today. I Googled the area we were in, and KKK meetings in the woods in the middle of the night. I got an instant match, Whiskey Hollow Road, NY. It is a 5-mile road cutting through the woods that is now closed at night because the KKK and satanic cults frequently did meetings and ritual sacrifices there at night. It said it's rumored that people were murdered there, including children. Apparently, it is very haunted. If you're interested, just Google it. The stories are horrible. This is crazy. I'm like 99% sure this is where we were, unless there is another similar place that a local central New Yorker can offer up. Has anyone heard of this place before? Anyone been there at night or seen one of these meetings? It was a crisp autumn evening when my friends and I decided to go camping in the remote woods for the weekend. We were all excited to escape the city and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of nature. By the time we arrived, night had already fallen, so we hurriedly set up our tents and lit a fire, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows around our campsite. As we sat around the fire, we began telling ghost stories, each one more chilling than the last. The crackling of the fire and the eerie shadows it created added to the spooky atmosphere. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and even the simplest of sounds seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. We roasted hot dogs for dinner, but the taste was overshadowed by the spine-tingling tales we shared. Around midnight, we decided to put out the fire and get ready to turn in for the night, eager to wake up early for a hike the next morning. Just as we were about to retreat to our separate tents, We heard a rustling noise coming from the bushes. "Did you hear that?" Henson asked, his voice tinged with unease. "Yay, I did," I replied, my heart beginning to race. "Rabbit," Bruce retorted dismissively as he walked back to his tent. Henson and I stood there for a moment scanning the trees but saw nothing. Reluctantly, we turned and started walking back towards our tents. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed out of the forest, making every hair on my body stand on end. I spun around, but still saw nothing. That's when Bruce turned his flashlight on, and there, in the beam of light, I saw them. A pair of glowing eyes, staring back at us from the bushes, unblinking and menacing. My heart pounded as we heard the creature emerge from the shadows. "I'm grabbing my rifle!" Bruce shouted as he ran toward his tent, but the creature let out a howl so deafening that it brought us all to our knees, wincing in pain. The sound seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the night, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I slowly looked up, bracing myself to face the beast that I was certain would attack and kill us. It resembled a wolf, a gray wolf, but it was massive and stood on its hind legs. The creature was no shorter than 8 feet tall. I could see its huge fangs, with saliva glistening in the moonlight, dripping onto the ground. Its eyes burned with a feral intensity, and its fur bristled as it growled, sending shivers down my spine. The creature took a step closer, and that's when Bruce fired. He fired again and again. But then there was silence. I opened my eyes to see the creature still standing there, unscathed. It let out another bone-chilling howl before sprinting in our direction with terrifying speed. My friends and I aren't dumb. We took off running towards our trucks. My heart raced with fear as we ran, the creature's footsteps pounding the ground behind us, growing louder with each passing second. I could hear its breath, ragged and menacing, as it closed in on us. The pounding of my heart reverberated throughout my ears, almost drowning out the sounds of our frantic escape. I glanced back and saw it gaining on us with tremendous intensity. Its eyes glowed with malevolent hatred as it clawed its way towards us. In my panic, I stumbled and tripped over a tree root. Henson quickly turned around to help me up, and just as I could run again, I felt an intense burning sensation across my back. I cried out in agony, but didn't dare stop running, the creature's growls echoing in the darkness behind us. We finally reached our trucks. I fumbled with my keys, my hands uncontrollably shaking. I managed to get inside, slam my door shut, and lock it just as the creature lunged at my car. It pounded on my roof with such force that the entire vehicle shook, its growls and screams echoing through the night, sending chills down my spine. Then it jumped to the hood of my car, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It started beating on my windshield, each blow causing cracks to spiderweb across the glass. I screamed as the creature's claws tore through the windshield, shards of glass flying everywhere. In a desperate move, I quickly unlocked my door and leaped out into the bedar of Bruce's truck as he was pulling out. Bruce and Henson both sped away as fast as they could, tires screeching against the dirt. I stared in horror as the creature just stood there, still perched on the hood of my truck, its eyes locked onto mine. To this day, we don't know what that creature was. I know what I believe it is. We all agree on one thing. We'll never go camping in those woods again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that the creature is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. A few weeks later, I couldn't get the experience out of my mind, so I decided to do some research. I found old legends and folklore about the area, speaking of a beast that roamed the woods, a creature that was neither man nor animal. Locals called it the Wendigo, a spirit of the wilderness that preyed on those who ventured too deep into its territory. The stories described it as a cursed being, transformed by its insatiable hunger and thirst for blood. I shared my findings with my friends, and we all felt a shiver run down our spines. The descriptions matched what we had seen that night, down to the last horrifying detail. We realized how close we had come to becoming another story in the local folklore, another set of names whispered around campfires. The thought of that creature still lurking in the woods, waiting for its next prey, was too much to bear. We made a pact never to speak of that night again, hoping that by staying silent, we could somehow escape its grasp. The silence was our shield, a fragile barrier against the terror that stalked the shadows. But every now and then, when the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but remember those glowing eyes and the terror we felt. The Wendigo is still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it remembers us too. The thought sends a chill down my spine, making me question whether silence is enough to keep the darkness at bay.